Well, thank you so much for joining in this final panel discussion of the day about how to transition a legislature to the cloud. Basically, just to explain the dynamics of the panel discussion for you and for the colleagues watching us in the audience. Basically, we have three rounds of questions, which I will direct to one of you. All the others will be able to comment, and the first person will be able to share their final thoughts. So the idea is for you to interact and for you to complement and even disagree, if that is the case, with what the other is saying. The idea is to have a more fluid conversation and a debate. And basically, this topic is quite complex to discuss in legislature environment. And I have to be honest here, I have asked for advice for many colleagues, for example, from Ludovic Delepine from the European Parliament, on how to approach this discussion with you guys. What are the main topics that are being discussed in regard to the governance of ICT and how to ensure business continuity and effectiveness and a digital transformation strategy, which brings us to the cloud discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to bring my first question, and this is for you, Stephen. In my first question for our panel discussion, I'd like to make a reference to the considerations Monsieur Delepine made in a previous presentation representing the EU Parliament, when he shared that an ICT governance strategy has 4 dimensions. It is 1, hybrid capabilities; 2, good relation between IT and the business areas or the end users; 3, institutional continuity and cybersecurity; and 4, timely delivery of IT solutions. Stephen, based on these elements, what is your view on how a legislature should incorporate its processing and storage needs in its digital transformation? And please feel free to share any examples you believe to be relevant for our discussion here.
All right, sure. That is a great question, a big one. I suppose starting with processing and storage needs, it's certainly in Ontario been an interesting journey to balance not only all of the new documents, the new databases, the new needs, with the requirements to now digitize and bring online all of the paper documents, and recognizing storage in the cloud has different aspects. We soon realized that understanding, for example, what used to be a fairly technical concept, but now has to be front of your mind, is around hot versus cold storage. And this idea that storage in the cloud, if you want to have, thousands or tens of thousands of documents available at the tip of your fingers, they all have to be in systems that can search and bring that to bear quickly. And that's quite expensive compared with, colder storage cloud options, where it's quite cheap to put your whole archives and repositories into the cloud, but may take longer to get that information. And so balancing these different factors is, between cost, speed, accessibility. That's a whole new type of decision that certainly we hadn't had to contemplate before. And I mean, in some ways, everything is more available overall, but keeping an eye on costs and really understanding your business process becomes really important. I think also at the end of the day, balancing sort of delivery with the needs of your end users becomes very important. And the old sort of monolithic systems and giant projects we might have made in the past don't work as well. You're sort of building the best stagecoach if you spend too long developing a system and the cloud and the rest of the world has moved on even before you've launched it. Your processes are changing even as you're discovering them. So moving more nimbly, in a more sort of modular way of thinking has definitely been something we've had to do, taking some of the larger problems and breaking them up into smaller activities so that we can deliver smaller systems. I think Jonathan was just mentioning as modules in systems, so you can activate and move more nimbly, has become very important.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point there, Stephen. And that, like, the way which we tend to approach it, as you sort of said, is that especially when we look at the hybrid sort of type of approach where you do have some of your systems on premise or in a private data center, and then you're moving to that sort of cloud environment as well. How do you actually get benefit up front because you're paying for anything in the cloud in a cloud environment as well? So how do you sort of transition, say you've got bills, tabling of papers, you've got agendas, you've got e-voting, submissions, committees, you know, we can keep on going for probably days and days and days with all the different sort of, you know, processes, etc. And you don't necessarily, if you are transitioning to a cloud environment, and I think that's really the key, is that what gives you the best benefit and the best, you know, bang for buck, as we sort of call it, you know, to actually transition in a meaningful way, to actually give you a outcome straight away.
Boa tarde a todos. Acho que eu não tenho muito a acrescentar, né? O Steven e o Jonathan já falaram bastante dessa questão. O Steven ainda colocou uma questão interessante, que é a parte do legado, né? A digitalização dos documentos já existentes. Hoje, mais cedo, o Rodolfo comentou a questão da necessidade de buscar mais dados de alguma forma do cidadão, né? Então, já está apontando, de uma certa maneira, que haverá uma maior necessidade de armazenamento e, obviamente, processamento, serão big data, a gente está falando de um grande volume de dados, né, para processar. Então, no nosso caso, a gente faz parte de patrocínio de um programa, né? Então, aí, contextualizar. A gente tem 5.500 realidades de grande porte, médio porte e pequeno porte, né? E aí, o Jonathan e o Steven já colocaram, né? Tem que haver um equilíbrio com relação ao custo dessa operação. Com certeza, a ida para a nuvem, ela é um caminho sem volta. A gente vai ter que ir, seja no módulo híbrido, seja no módulo completo. Eu acho que futuramente a gente vai encontrar mais e mais uma ida para a nuvem, seja o software como serviço, a plataforma como serviço, ou a infra como serviço. A forma como isso vai ser utilizado, dependendo da realidade e do porte da casa legislativa, que tem que ser levado em consideração, né? Na parte de segurança, a gente vai ter que atentar para as questões de compliance, com certeza, mas eu acredito que muito disso vai acabar vindo do fornecimento dos provedores dos serviços de nuvem, né? Então, o que nós, como gestores de TI, devemos prestar atenção são no tipo de fornecedor, na qualidade e nas cláusulas contratuais para minimizar qualquer tipo de risco ou compartilhar, que seja, né? Então, com certeza, Steve, o Jonathan já tinha matado quase totalmente a questão. É bem isso mesmo, equilíbrio e uma forma bem modular e bem planejada dessa implementação.
Well, I think at the end of the day, moving to a cloud environment raises a lot of challenges, more challenges than you expect. And, you know, at the end of the day, I heard once at a conference someone say, technology is not a solution in as much a barrier between you and what you're trying to get done. And, you know, to make that barrier frictionless, seamless, you know, nobody thinks about the potholes in the road when the road is working and is smooth is what it's all about. And people feel more acutely now these bumps when you're trying things that aren't working. I think to balance in Ontario, we've really tried to find the right balance between tradition and innovation. And, you know, I think the starting with the goal of being entirely paperless is very ambitious. And we've tried to scale that back to what we affectionately call paperless. And I think as we continue down the road to bring old files into these new cloud spaces, to provide new interfaces for members, and to make it easier for technical staff to manage, we have to find this balance, making sure we're delivering things and not building old things that take years to get out the door, but also not rushing to fail. And I do think there is such a rich tradition and history in parliaments, in the documents and the processes that have been around in some cases hundreds of years, I'm sure even longer in some jurisdictions. And it's not so easy to create a software for this. And finding the right balance that supports that tradition, that supports that innovation is what it's all about. And unfortunately, costs, technology, project management, modern business process come into play. But if you're able to keep your eye on slowly moving forward in small steps in a modular way, I think it's very possible for parliaments to transition. And we've certainly been seeing this in Ontario as we've been going forward in our journey.
I think that's a very good points there from yourself, Stephen. I think we're going through similar processes with other parliaments, and we're loading data back to the 1800s when the first parliaments in Australia were around and being reported on. And what we found was that just due to the large data sets, which were being created back then, is that we could load up a simple PDF and say, right, we're done with it. But it really gives no value to where you've been as a whole country and where you actually are now. And mapping out that is actually using, again, technology and sort of potentially mapping out what that data actually looks like. You've got a lot more capability in the cloud than you would have in a traditional on-premise environment as well. So I think it's also about mapping out capability in terms of what you're actually wanting to achieve in the long term, and just chipping away at it. Like, it's not necessarily taking a big bang approach from the actual outset as well, as saying, like, as you sort of said, like, what is your goal? What is your business objective? Because there is a lot of tradition, there is a lot of we've always done it this way type of approach. And sometimes you do need to challenge, well, why are we doing it this way as well? And trying to then sort of say, well, actually, we can actually adapt this process into a digital world. And knowing that other parliaments have actually done this in the past as well will give you that sort of level of comfort that we can actually manage that risk and we can manage that process as well. I think, yeah, the question was around the technical considerations to decide for an on-premise or a cloud implementation, and what are the main compliance considerations to implement a cloud strategy from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah. Uma parte da resposta, né, a gente já teve na pergunta passada, né? Importante. Questões técnicas é a capacidade técnica balanceada com custo, né? Porque entre a escolha de você fazer uma instalação on-premise ou 100% na nuvem, vai depender da sua capacidade de ter uma equipe para manter essa instalação, se for on-premise, comparada com o custo de você manter isso na nuvem, né? Em termos de compliance, basicamente, hoje a gente tem muito que se preocupar com, no Brasil, LGPD, GDPR, e na Europa, Austrália e Estados Unidos, eu acredito que e Canadá também tem legislação semelhante. Além disso, nós temos que nos preocupar com a questão da pichação ou a quebra de integridade das informações divulgadas, nas questões de transparência. Mas como eu coloquei na questão anterior, né, hoje a gente tem um sistema financeiro, por assim dizer, onde você confia nas instituições provedoras do serviço, que são os bancos. Eu acredito que dessa mesma linha, os provedores de serviços em nuvem, né, eles vão se sedimentar e vão ter as suas características da prestação de serviço, dando mais confiança ou menos na questão do provimento para sua clientela, né? Então, nessa questão especificamente, eu recomendaria que haja uma consultoria, uma orientação específica da necessidade da casa legislativa, né, no caso, para que ela consiga adequar os objetivos que ela tem no modelo de negócio com relação às necessidades que ela tem e os recursos que são possíveis. Como eu falei, por exemplo, no Brasil, a gente tem situação de que pequenas casas só vão conseguir migrar para esse ambiente de nuvem através de um processo de consórcio, onde eles vão compartilhar, ou que seja uma infra, ou que seja um provimento de plataforma ou de software, mas elas sozinhas, elas não têm nem condições orçamentárias, não têm capacidade financeira nem para fazer fisicamente sozinhas, muito menos uma contratação hoje, na realidade que a gente tem de custo operacional. Mas eu acredito que no horizonte de médio prazo, ou até mesmo curto, essa condição deve melhorar, porque com a utilização em massa, a tendência é que haja um barateamento do custo para você fazer uma migração em nuvem, para nuvem, esse tipo de coisa.
What your sort of thoughts are, sort of Stephen as well, and Keny, is around the upskilling of staff, which you do have, which are currently working, say, on-premise systems, and what, you know, the transition and the strategy is like for training up staff to actually then manage a cloud environment too. We've worked with other parliaments in the past where I think there's been some hesitancy from the IT perspective, where they're very comfortable managing an on-premise environment, and you know the strategy for upskilling, and that's what we tend to do in terms of from an upskilling perspective is that transition. So to help with that sort of cost instead of necessarily bringing in dedicated specialist resources as well. Like, what has been your sort of experience around that?
Yeah, I can mention that. And I just wanted to add something around security as well, listening to what Keny was saying. Sometimes, I mean, we talk about cybersecurity, the threats out there and the big threats, but just anecdotally, one of the threats we discovered was an internal threat from the members, who are very busy and can't remember lots of passwords, and will often hand their password over to their staff to help them. That might be a familiar experience for others as well, and that creates all sorts of issues. How do you send secure and confidential information, sometimes financial, human resources, when passwords are out there in the wind? And you know, even something as simple sounding as multi-factor authentication gets complicated when a member has a personal phone, a work phone, a government phone. How do you make sure they get that? And maybe not even a strong sense of technology and how to do that. So it's been a very interesting journey on the security front, very personal, as well as, you know, the bigger picture, protecting the network and cyber security, all of that. But I find it a very interesting experience for members as well, making sure that they can get in and they'll be quick to share their password when they're busy. And we have to think that through as we work on these. Your question around training is a great one as well. Certainly when we embarked upon and realized we would move more into the cloud, move away from on-prem, we recognized we did not have all of the in-house expertise we would need. When we worked closely with our partners at Microsoft, you know, it's easy for them to say, oh, SharePoint this and SharePoint that. And we thought, we really don't know what that is and what those implications are. Part of our modernization program had to include staff training and opportunities for those interested in upskilling to be able to not just work on these projects as part of the project, but step out of the work and really spend time learning these new tools, figuring out what they are, and in some cases going all the way down the road to places like certification, if that was of interest to them. So You know, I think there's an opportunity to upskill staff to, when you standardize on some of these practices and tools that are out there, you're giving them a leg up, not only in your organization, but in their own career. And learning some of these new things has been, you know, a win-win for both the employer and for staff. And I think that's super important. If you just ask them to go to the cloud and start downloading and building and doing, that's a recipe for disaster for sure.
And for cost as well. Yeah, and for cost. If people start just spinning up services in the cloud, as soon as you spin up a service, you know, we start paying for it. So, yep.
Yeah, I remember, sorry, I'll just add, in our early days, I remember receiving some of my first bills from the hosting services and asking the technical teams, did you know you clicked a button, I guess, somewhere, and now $7,000 of a server running day and night, now it's come in, what's up with that? And yeah, you have to be aware.
And like, it's actually sort of a really good segue into our sort of last question around, really about what are the necessary steps for, you know, to transition a legislature to a cloud, as well around the digital transformation strategy, but also around the legacy system. So looking at hybrid sort of approaches as well. So like when we look at like what are the sort of first steps for the IT department and the clerk's office to really perform a successful implementation of a cloud strategy, like, so we usually tend to start with like looking at what systems are available, what the, you know, the existing data sources are, and also understanding what the risks are, you know, in terms of like, what's your risk management strategy? When we talked about during this panel, your cybersecurity, as you sort of said, like, you know, you have internal risk, you've got external risk, and the cloud is still a risk itself, you know, in its own right. So your on-premise environment is a risk. So it's really about performing that risk assessment in a meaningful way. So, you know, understanding that you still need to manage the cloud, you know, you just don't give it across to Microsoft or to AWS or Amazon to actually manage it for you. You still have to be an active participant in a cloud environment too. So what are your sort of thoughts in terms of like first steps when we actually look at either a hybrid or a full cloud environment? Like, what were your sort of first steps when you looked at that sort of overall transition?
Para minha pergunta inicial, para mim, resumindo de certa maneira, o que você já falou, planejamento, fazer planejado, com visão do futuro, abrangendo todos esses aspectos de a forma de transição. O Steven colocou até na resposta passada, né? Importantíssimo, capacitação, né? Nossa realidade no Brasil, a gente tem parlamentares idosos, muito idosos, e que é constante essa questão de esquecimento de senha. Nós temos uma rotatividade muito grande de pessoal. Então, até mesmo a questão desse planejamento, conseguir caber dentro de uma legislatura, né, tem que ser observado, né? Com relação à questão legada, que também ocorre, que temos bastante, fazer esse mesmo tipo de avaliação. O legado pode ser que tenha um custo baixo para você fazer uma mudança, uma migração para uma nuvem, como também o custo pode ser inviabilizador deste processo, ele pode impedir que você consiga fazer, e você tem que refazer toda a tua base de ferramentas que apoiam o processo legislativo. Então, basicamente, assim, o resumo é um bom planejamento, observando todos esses aspectos que você, Jonathan, já colocou, né, de preocupação com segurança, preocupação de como que vai ser essa migração, quais os passos, os objetivos que eu quero atingir ao longo do tempo, pensar médio, longo prazo, como isso vai ficar, como isso vai ser mantido depois, né? Isso é muito importante. O custo total de operação, depois que você fizer esse processo, né? E como o Steven lembrou, sempre vai ter que estar treinando, porque vai ter rotatividade, vai existir a troca de pessoal, vamos ter novos legisladores, vamos ter novas pessoas, vamos ter novos corpos técnicos, né? Pessoas que estão trabalhando nesse projeto. Então, aprender com os exemplos dos outros, aproveitar, por exemplo, aquilo que já está feito. Tem um exemplo aí da Assembleia Legislativa do Rio Grande do Norte. Nós mesmos, lá do Senado, que patrocinamos o programa, a gente tem produtos open, de código aberto, disponíveis no GitHub. Então, é aproveitar isso para poder minimizar custo, minimizar as etapas para poder caminhar nesse sentido, eu diria.
I can add one of the most interesting parts, speaking of on-prem moving to cloud. Oh, sorry. Yeah. One of the most interesting parts from us moving from an on-prem system, wanting to move into the cloud, when you mentioned, Jonathan, about databases, we immediately thought right away the heavy Oracle systems that had been on-prem for so many years would be a great place to start. And it turns out that the heaviest, biggest databases that you want to move aren't the first things that you can move at all. It turns out those are the ones you got to do later. And you have to be very careful. You know, you don't really have project offsets and cost savings in those early days, because you have to keep everything. You're not ready to just turn one thing off as you turn thing over another. There's overlaps, and that type of continuity takes time and sort of very careful steps. So even though we've adopted and now are using a number of new technologies, our Oracle system is still there, and it will be there, I'm quite sure, right until the last days when we can finally go, okay, now we feel very comfortable, and now we can take those final steps. So that was a very interesting piece of learning. And I'll just add a point around business continuity in the cloud. There are certain systems and processes that do keep me up at night. I never want to have to see on our broadcast the clerk turning to the speaker going, just hold on, please, the proceedings, pause the clock, my screen isn't refreshing, the internet's not working. That's not something that anybody ever wants to have to experience. So I think it's a very unique space we work in this parliamentary context. And we have to ensure that even in the cloud, whatever those systems are, have some sort of continuity with an offline, a paper-based process, an on-prem system, something that can provide that peace of mind to everyone. Because, you know, as they say, the show must go on, and the orders of the day must move forward. How do we do that, even knowing that, you know, the cloud is right there at the leading front of technology, and there will always be glitches and things that come up. So I think that's a big challenge that we're still working out, still trying to figure out.
I think it's an extremely valid point there, especially around the ability to adapt. You know, things change so quickly in Parliament. They can change with a simple proposition or a simple, you know, a vote effectively. And, you know, we've been running e-voting for different parliaments, you know, for numbers of years now. And, you know, in the event that, you know, there is a massive thunderstorm and the internet, you know, we've had a whole county or a whole state within Australia literally have a blackout for 2 days. There was no power. And so in that instance, well, Parliament still had to sit, you know, Parliament still had to function. And so even though things are digitized and things are operational in an on-premise environment or a cloud environment, you know, a battery may run out, you know, or something may occur, or they may drop a tablet and suddenly it's cracked, or suddenly it doesn't actually function, etc. So the ability to actually find, you know, there's a level of resiliency which has to be built into these processes. I think even if you are going on premise or a hybrid or a cloud or a full cloud environment, that we still have a paper-based backup. Now, nobody wants to use it because it takes a lot longer than a digitized process, but we have it sitting there in the background just in case. So, and I think it's just, you know, coming to the fact that, that may occur. And even when you're doing, say, for example, e-voting, there may be the function where somebody remotely is casting a vote, but then that didn't, for whatever reason, get through, but they've done a valid cast of that vote and it can be audited that that actually was actually true. You might need to have the facility for the speaker to actually cast their behalf, or vote on their behalf, as an example. So it's thinking through what your standing orders are or your sessional orders are, and what even your constitution. Like we had a instance in Uganda where the constitution is saying that you must vote with your voice. So in the case with e-voting, you have to actually then adapt to actually even what your constitution says. If you're voting remotely, you actually have to record the voice. So like it's just an interesting segue in terms of there are so many levels which you need to think about when we look at even a digitalization process in general. So yeah.
Só complementando isso, João, inclusive no Brasil, por exemplo, uma da realidade é que o processo legislativo, como ele funciona, é baseado em normas legais, que são votadas, inclusive, pelos próprios parlamentares. Então, para que nós ainda estamos aprendendo, o Covid nos deu uma oportunidade muito grande de acelerar esse processo, mas ainda estamos amadurecendo isso. Nós tivemos que fazer às pressas, né? Então, todas essas ocorrências que você falou, você comentou, no meio de uma votação, congela, tem um atraso na internet, você está na hora de chega o momento de votar e ele perde a conexão. Todas essas ocorrências a gente teve, né? A importância do plano de contingência em qualquer situação de segurança é importante, sim. Eu acredito que a gente vai evoluir e esse modelo, eu acho que ele vai permanecer. Inclusive, num comentário em uma apresentação mais cedo, teve uma apresentadora que comentou que a população estava acompanhando os processos legislativos. Quando voltou para o presencial, eles deixaram de ter o acesso que estavam tendo tão facilmente, e houve reclamação sobre esse aspecto. Então, eu acredito que isso vai continuar, mesmo voltando, a gente conseguindo voltar para o modelo presencial, esse modelo digital que dá acesso ao cidadão, acho que ele vai permanecer, com certeza.
So I think we've only got a few minutes left here. So I'd like to open up to the floor just to have any sort of specific closing remarks as well, so we can wind this up on a positive note. So I'd like to just start and say, I think the cloud is a worthwhile investment for a number of reasons. I think, transparency, data security, and also the cloud. Also, companies who are heavily invested in the cloud, that the companies such as Microsoft, AWS, or Google, they're investing billions of dollars every year into creating a platform which you can leverage. You don't have to invest in that yourself. So the ability for a parliament to take advantage of, being able to process large data sets is so much easier in the cloud than what you would have to then purchase and configure and then support, maintain on premise, as an example. The ability to just, look at certain modules. So you don't necessarily, if you are sort of doing an on-premise environment, you don't have to do a big bang approach either. There are other strategies which other parliaments have done where they're working in hybrid modes as well. So, it's understanding that you can take a gradual transition to the cloud environment instead of doing a big bang approach, I think would be my takeaway from this as well. So, and anybody ever got any more thoughts to share on this?
Yeah, sure. I can add that it's not a straight linear journey to the cloud. And we certainly experienced this. The things that we thought would be easy were hard, and it really forces you to hold up a mirror and look at your business process. There's no straight one-for-one move. You sort of, as you were saying, there are trade-offs and considerations to be made. There's a huge benefit for using a software as a service, and it does mean fitting, in some cases, your process to something already established. And that's hard for some, but it's also a huge benefit if you're ready to let go of certain items. And having those discussions are only partly technical. They involve the clerks, they involve legislative thinking, they involve legal experts, and of course all of the technical specialists. So it's a big and broad conversation. I think that technical teams, that technology staff can start that and get people excited and show people what's possible. When you were just saying the processing power in the cloud now, it's almost not to be believed. And until you experience, an instant Hansard search over hundreds of years and exactly getting the information you need, it's hard to almost visualize for those who didn't grow up with it, what it can do for us and what it can do for an organization. So I think, showing and piloting, trying things, demonstrating, it's all part of the conversation towards the cloud. And I think that's a big part of the process beyond just the technology. It's an exciting one, yeah.
Eu concordo totalmente com vocês, também acho que é excitante, é um desafio grande, né? Então, agradeço muito a oportunidade de estar participando aqui dessa conversa. Eu acho que ainda vamos ter muitas outras conversas sobre este assunto. Acho que vai evoluir bastante, né? A gente está só no começo, eu diria. Muito obrigado e boa noite para vocês.
I think, yeah, thank you so much for both your involvement in this